to a lifetime of experience. To all the Peace Corps volunteers, past, present, and future, thank you for your service to your country and the world.
Never look a howler monkey in the eye.
Thank you, everyone, so much. That was one of our Peace Corps 50th anniversary videos, and I think it's pretty adorable. Welcome to the University of South Florida. My name is Katie Roders, and I am the Peace Corps campus recruiter. In addition to that, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the country of Kazakhstan, 2007 to 2009. Also, I graduated with my undergraduate degree in women's studies here in 2007 from the University of South Florida, and I am currently getting my master's in public health as well. Tonight, USF World is thrilled to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps, as well as honoring International Education Week. The University of South Florida has a rich partnership with the Peace Corps. We had our first USF alum leave for Sierra Leone in 1962, and since that time, we've had over 350 USF alum serve in countries around the globe. Our PCVs make up faculty, staff, and student body population here at USF. We also have two incredible Master's International programs with the College of Engineering and as well with the College of Public Health. Tonight we have some incredible speakers and panelists whose lives have all been touched by the Peace Corps. Our first speaker will be Dr. Karen Holbrook. I have the pleasure of introducing her. Dr. Holbrook is Senior Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Global Affairs at the University of South Florida. Dr. Holbrook holds a second title of Professor of Molecular Medicine at USF. She was also the President of Ohio State University, where she led one of the nation's largest and most distinguished universities dedicated to teaching, research, and service. As head of USF's research and global programs, Dr. Holbrook oversees key initiatives as one of the fastest growing research universities in the nation. Please welcome Dr. Karen Holbrook.
Thank you very much, Katie, and welcome to all of you. I'm delighted to see all of you here tonight. This is a very special week for all of us at the University of South Florida, and actually at every university around the nation, because this is International Studies, the International Education Week. And we have had a phenomenal week, and tonight's event is another piece of that that really adds to it in a very significant way. Yesterday, we celebrated our Fulbrighters on campus, and it was an incredible morning. We heard wonderful things from two of our faculty who talked about their Fulbright experiences, one in Mexico and one in South Africa. And both of them left people truly in awe. And my sense is that every one of you here who has been a Peace Corps volunteer would have the same kind of a story to tell that has been very impactful on your own lives as well as on the lives of the people who you served while you were a volunteer. So tonight we're really excited to be here to celebrate Peace Corps, another partner in the international education arena. This is a university that cares very deeply about all of its international programs, its international students and faculty, and all of our people who go abroad. And we try to do as many things as possible to make this a reality for as many people on the faculty, staff, and student body as possible. We are USF World. That's a very bold thing to say about a university, that you are the world, but we are, because our view is that everything at the University of South Florida needs to think about itself, not only in the university concept, but also in the context of the global environment. And so Peace Corps is one of our very most important programs, something we care very deeply about, and we are so pleased that we have two graduate programs that are involved with the Peace Corps. I don't think there are a lot of universities that can say that, and they have been so very successful here. So we're just delighted that you're here for this evening's event. I know it's going to be very exciting. It is a very important part of international education. So thank you for letting me welcome all of you here. We're just delighted, and thank you. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Dr. Holbrook. Oh, hello. And now we are extremely fortunate to have a community member who has had a long legacy of working and being also a Peace Corps volunteer. Mr. Robert Blanker began his Peace Corps career in 1984, serving in the country of Costa Rica. Since that time, he has been a campus recruiter, as well as a associate director, country director in several Peace Corps countries, as well as a technical trainer. Currently, Mr. Blenker is the Vice President of Renewable Energy and Chief Development Officer at WRB Enterprises. Mr. Blenker.
If I stand behind the podium, I'll probably start talking about chemistry or something, so. It's fantastic to be here this evening. I'm really humbled because I don't know that my story is really any different than any of the other returned volunteers here. I think we come from different walks of life and perhaps different backgrounds, but I think the motivations are often similar, especially the motivations that allow volunteers to successfully serve their entire tour. And I want to emphasize that the R in RPCV is returned Peace Corps volunteer. And once you're a volunteer, you're always volunteer. You'll find that the Peace Corps service touches every corner of your life as you evolve and progress. You know, like I said, I think my story is like many of others here. I can blame my mother, who's actually here in the audience. She to be the Peace Corps volunteer, and I think I actually got the application. So, but I think it may have been being a bundle of luggage in the back seat of a Cessna 180 that my mother and father flew down to El Salvador in I think it was 69, 68, somewhere around there. That was my first taste of overseas, but one of the most influential people that got me interested in Peace Corps was a guy named Barry Wakeman, who was head of education at the Cincinnati Zoo at the time, and he had been a volunteer in Uganda doing rural environmental education and small zoos actually in Africa in the 60s when it was the early days of environmentalism and environmental awareness. But what I most appreciated about Barry was his take charge and can-do attitude. There was no problem you couldn't solve. So that's really my motivation was, how can I go somewhere and make a difference, really live someplace and not be a tourist? And that was what got me involved in Peace Corps. Since then, let's see, as I was the Katie of Ohio University, so I was thrilled when she called. It's a fantastic job. And then went on. I was very fortunate. I was a volunteer in Costa Rica. I was able to work then in Washington in Director Rupi's office. Got to meet the legends of Peace Corps, the Shrivers, and so on. I was then very fortunate to go and become an associate director in Honduras. And the world was in a state of flux then. A lot was changing, much as it is, I think, today. But I was able to reopen Peace Corps in Nicaragua as Daniel Ortega handed over the reins to Violeta Chamorro through a democratic process. I was able to open Peace Corps in Uruguay as they were coming out of a military dictatorship. I was able to work in Argentina, and then I thought I was finished. But I got a call late at night and said, Blenker, you like going different places. How about Armenia in the middle of winter with no electricity? So it was surreal. They had shut down the nuclear reactor because of safety issues, and so we had about a half an hour of electricity a day through the middle of winter in Yerevan, which was a challenge. But from there, I went on to Slovakia, was able to open up the Peace Corps in Slovakia when they split from the Czech Republic, worked in Hungary, Moscow, and finished up in Kyrgyzstan. I see we have kindred spirits from Central Asia, which was very different. And so I thought it was done. I'd come back to the U.S. and get a job. It doesn't work that way. You almost get slotted. So I guess what I'd like to say is your Peace Corps service sets the stage for opportunities you didn't even know existed before you joined the Peace Corps. So I worked in Colombia as a stringer for the Washington Times. And doing what I'm doing now, I develop renewable energy projects, which started with setting up a small private electric utility in Honduras, and now that's gone on to, I'm working on wind farms in the Dominican Republic, small geothermal plants throughout the Caribbean. It really touches what you do as you move forward. It also teaches you flexibility. How many RPCVs here actually did what they were recruited to do? Okay, they're surprising number. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the reality, because you find that you do what needs to be done. I was originally recruited to do aerial radio telemetry on big game in Tsavo East National Park in Kenya, because as a Buckeye, I went through the wildlife management school, and I was out there radio tracking chipmunks in the snow on North Campus, and just like Kenya. And so about 3 weeks before going, they said, well, you know what? The government of Kenya changed the requirements. They want only PhD candidates for this. So how about Costa Rican agroforestry? So I said, okay, whatever. I'll go to Costa Rica. You know, I was all set for Africa. Well, I get to Costa Rica, and they said, well, you know, agroforestry is great, but how would you like to be a community organizer in rural housing? I said, oh, sure, whatever, we'll do that. But it was actually fantastic. What you find is you draw on skills that you don't know you have. We were discussing earlier that as country director of Slovakia, it was kind of fun. It was kind of being an A-list celebrity in a small, newly independent country. And it wasn't my work, it was the volunteers. They were out doing fantastic stuff. But the Minister of Culture had us all over for dinner one evening. And he said something profound, I think, because we're thinking, somebody had asked him what he thought the most significant contribution of Peace Corps to Slovakia was at the time. And we're thinking, well, it's teaching teachers of English to get higher levels of fluency as they integrate into Europe, teaching small business. But it wasn't at all. He said, in his mind, Peace Corps volunteers were living, breathing examples of American democracy, if you will. And what he meant by that was the ability to sit down and resolve problems even among groups that were historically antagonistic. So whether it was the Hungarians and the Slovaks down in southern Slovakia, or government versus non-government organizations trying to work together, the process of bringing them together and collaborating was the contribution that he felt was most important. Kind of living, breathing examples of successful conflict resolution. And to me, that was telling. Let's see, how much time do I have here? 5 more minutes, okay. The other thing too is, I look at where my cohort of volunteers have ended up. One of the things I used to love saying is that there's no mediocrity in Peace Corps. And I don't care if you go to work in the public sector or the private sector or not. I was confronted upon leaving Peace Corps that there do exist mediocre people in the world, but I didn't meet any of them in the Peace Corps. So I was spoiled. But I look at the guys I was volunteers with. Michael Skelly has run for Congress. He set up a big wind energy company. Another friend of ours, I was talking to somebody who just got back from Guatemala. He stayed with Peace Corps. He was years with the Inter-American Foundation, just ended up a term as deputy director in Guatemala. Journalists, NGO leaders, teachers, but nobody's mediocre. They're all exceptional. They've all gone on to do just fantastic things in a broad range of fields. And really, it's almost like being a member of a giant fraternity or a professional society. You step off a plane or you go to a meeting and somebody says, Peace Corps, oh, where did you serve? And there's a commonality of service there that I think is important. And one of the things that I tell employers or folks that I work with, for example, we will specifically go out and target return Peace Corps volunteers for the work that we do because it's a known commodity. I know that if I take somebody who's been through Peace Corps and I throw them at a problem, they're going to figure it out. I don't have to worry about them. I can provide them vision and guidance, but they'll figure it out. And so I think from an employer perspective, there's a growing appreciation of what that experience means. And then, I guess finally, I always think about Peace Corps' 3 goals. I don't do I've been out of it for a while. Does Peace Corps still talk in terms of the 3 goals? Well, as I recall, they are to teach or to assist in the development, to learn, and then to disseminate what we have learned as we come back to the U.S. And what I'm finding more and more, especially given that much of my work is international, as a result of Peace Corps service, the international fluency of the United States is enhanced. And what I mean by that is we're able to go out, we're able to find common ground, we're able to work effectively in different places, in different cultural settings. And I think that's one of the most tangible assets that Peace Corps brings back to the United States. And I can't emphasize that enough, especially in an increasingly interconnected world where we really are becoming more interdependent. It's important to be able to not just speak a language, but understand the cultural context, understand why people do what they do, and be able to work together with them. And I think it's starting to yield tangible benefits. Other than that, I think it's once again, it's a great center around which to continue that community activity. I often talk about how people get involved in their communities once they come back. There's a large group down in Sarasota that continues to be active, not only domestically but internationally. There are, of course, all the Friends of Slovakia, Friends of Uruguay, Friends of Honduras. And what's interesting is everybody's got anecdotes, so I'll only tell two quick ones. But I was in, I think it was Nicaragua, and I was having a difficult time figuring out a contract situation, and I ended up talking to the Minister of Energy at the time, and we were talking about how to get around this problem, et cetera, and then somehow we ended up talking about Peace Corps. It turns out he went to a school that was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer, and poof, all of a sudden the doors opened up. We could have a much more rational conversation because there was a commonality there. So for those of you who haven't gone yet, do it. Some of you are talking about whether you should postpone employment. That's a difficult and personal question, but I know that if you don't do it, you will regret it. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I now have the great pleasure of introducing the Deputy Director of the Peace Corps. Carrie Hessler-Radelet has been the Deputy Director of the Peace Corps since June of 2010. She served as a volunteer in Western Samoa from 1981 to 1983. There, she taught high school and helped design a national public awareness campaign on disaster preparedness. The Deputy Director has worked in the field of public health for over 2 decades, specializing in HIV/AIDS and maternal and child health. She was actively involved in the establishment of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which supports many Peace Corps projects. I am very excited and honored to introduce Carrie Hessler-Radelet, the Deputy Director of Peace Corps.
Grateful to USF. I'm from can you hear me? Okay. So I don't know much about Florida, and it's just really a pleasure to learn more about USF, and I am really so impressed by your global outlook. Long and wonderful relationship with you. Katie already gave you all the statistics about our relationship, how important you are in our history, how many volunteers you've sent over the past 50 years, and the ever-growing number of applicants we have from USF. It's really very impressive. We're here today to celebrate Peace Corps' 50th anniversary and also to honor international education. And again, incredible, all the wonderful things that you guys have been doing around that, around the whole topic of international education. Yesterday there was something on Fulbright and a whole week's worth of fantastic international education. As you know, Peace Corps was started by President John F. Kennedy. Before I go into that, I want to know how many of you are return volunteers. Could you just stand up? Stand up. I want to see you stand up. Give them applause. also want to ask how many of you are students? And if I could ask you to stand up, I'd also like to. I want to give students a hand, too. So before I start, I want to recognize two people here who are in the audience, who are really three people here who are very special to me. First of all, I want to introduce Ken Ayers, who is the regional office manager of the Atlanta office, and Florida is part of his region. He's a wonderful guy, really so supportive of USF, and a return volunteer himself, and a fantastic professional. So I'm really so pleased to be here. And it's because of Ken that I am here, actually. The other two people I want to recognize are some old and dear friends, and they'll probably kill me, but I want to recognize Bill and Agnes Strack, who, Bill was the regional office manager in New England, in Boston, where I actually worked as a public affairs specialist immediately after returning from Peace Corps. Bill gave me my first job after Peace Corps, and I probably owe him my career. And his wife, Agnes, is also a dear friend. Bill is a volunteer in the Philippines. He accomplished the fourth goal of Peace Corps, which is bringing home a spouse. So it's really an honor for me to see them. I haven't seen them for 2 decades, and I'm really thrilled. Peace Corps was started by President John F. Kennedy. Its first director was Sergeant Shriver, who was the brother-in-law of President Kennedy, father of Maria Shriver, father-in-law of Arnold Schwarzenegger. That. Sarge used to joke a lot that the reason he got the job is because President Kennedy wasn't quite sure that the Peace Corps thing would work out, and he figured it would be easier to fire his brother-in-law than a political appointee. I promise him it's absolutely true. It's hard to fire a political appointee. So many things have changed in the last 50 years, but there are lots of things that haven't changed. And Bob, I just loved your description of your time. In 1961, where there were the first volunteers, Time magazine wrote an article about Peace Corps, and this is what they said about Peace Corps volunteers. Time magazine described Peace Corps volunteers this way. Volunteers are patriotic and adventuresome. The patience of Job, the perseverance of a saint, and the digestive system of an ostrich. I don't really know what a digestive system of an ostrich is like. Maybe you could tell that, or maybe you would have been able to tell me that had you gone to Kenya. But I think it means you can eat anything, and I think that's pretty much the truth, right? So, the rest of you, all of you return volunteers, I just want to start by saying that I owe you a debt of gratitude, because everywhere I go, and I travel constantly, but everywhere I go, people thank me for what you do and what you did. For many of you, you were the only American among them. You spoke their language. You ate their got runny tummy as a result. You lived in a house that looked just like your neighbors. You rode in that broken down bus where your next, like you said, mine was a chicken. You lived among them, and that really makes all the difference in their life. That bond of relationship is really the core element of Peace Corps. I'm going to tell you in a little while about some of the innovations that we're doing right now. But at the heart of Peace Corps, the essence is the relationships that we build, the long-lasting, common touch that we have as volunteers living as neighbors and families all over the world in 139. That is the real essence of Peace Corps. I want to tell you about a meeting I had a couple weeks ago with the president of Guinea. One of the good things of my job is I get to meet with heads of state. And about 2.5 months ago, President Obama invited 4 new democratically elected presidents of West African countries to celebrate democracy in West Africa, and President Alpha Conde of Guinea was one of those presidents. Guinea is a special country in Peace Corps. It's one of the few where we've more or less had a steady presence. There have been some ins and outs and evacuations, but more or less we've been there for 50 years. There used to be a story that the average Guinean family was 1 father, 1 mother, 4 children, and a Peace Corps volunteer. In any case, Guinea is always been an important country for us. And so when he came, he asked to meet with. And we sort of divide up the world when we travel. So I was selected to go meet with President Conte. He had survived an assassination attempt just 2 days earlier. He was firmly in control. It was quelled fairly quickly, but it was very stressful nonetheless. There was gunfire at his presidential palace, and they put it down, and then he had to get on a plane and fly to Washington. And he had landed just 3 hours earlier before I showed up at his hotel. And it's a very formal occasion when you meet with heads of state. I have my whole team, there are 5 of us. Had his entourage, and there was the ubiquitous flat screen television blaring in the background. Every African ministers meeting that you ever go to, there's always a television blaring. Anyway, we're sitting down, and his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked exhausted. And I was thinking to myself, this is going to be the world's shortest meeting. And so we get talking, and it's a very formal affair. He says something, formal about, on behalf of the government of Guinea, I want to thank you for your long service. And I say, on behalf of, President Obama and Peace Corps, we are so very grateful for the support that you've given to our volunteers over the last 50 years. And then other tokens of appreciation, and then that's it. And I get up to go, because it was clear to me that he was exhausted and really just needed to sleep. So I stand up, and he puts his hand on my arm, and he said, stop, I want to talk to you from my heart, please. And I had, as I said, I had a whole entourage, so happily I had an assistant who was writing every word down, because I want to tell you exactly what he said, because it was so incredible. I would like to speak to you from the heart. I want to tell you how Peace Corps transformed my life, but more importantly, its impact in the lives of my people. I had a Peace Corps volunteer teacher who was the first person I can remember who really believed. Late night tutoring helped me to pass my national exam. Then he helped me navigate the difficult journey through the university application. But more importantly, is the impact your volunteers have had on my people. During the course of my 6-month campaign for presidency, I went to villages in the Far East, which is the part that's bordering Liberia. I went to villages in the far eastern part of Guinea, places where my own campaign staff wouldn't go. Very northern part of Guinea, which is arid and dry and tough to live in, and you can only get. Villages in the center part of Guinea. NGOs, some foreigners went there. They went in their big white SUVs. Your presence, you told my people that the United States is so important to you that you're willing to. Being there validated my people in a way that not even sending them money. They were proud to teach you their language, their way of life. Sums up what Peace Corps is all about. I hear the story every country I visit in, and it's often from a president. Sometimes it's a taxi driver or a nurse or a mother or the guy who's selling pineapple on the corner. I know as a return volunteer, I often wonder about whether or not sometimes 4 decades have passed since volunteers. I promise you, they still talk about you. They tell their grandchildren about you. Talking about the Mzungu who lived here. So I just want you to know that you did make a difference. I think most of us feel that we got more than we gave, and I suspect that that's many of us feel that the government felt that we got to our community really progress or whatever technical issues we were able to send in our community. And that's also probably true. But what we don't realize is that we leave a bit of ourselves behind, and we also take a bit of our own country back to become ambassadors for those countries. Most of us continue to have a life of service. Many of us continue to have a relationship with our own village. Projects there, sometimes we go back and visit. Sometimes we don't have a relationship with our community, but we have a relationship with others. Some of us have, long careers like Bob that touch people in communities around the world. And so we got more than we gave, but we also have given our lives. That's something that I wanted to communicate to all of you. I don't think we realize really one of the problems that Peace Corps has is it's very hard for us to monitor and evaluate the impact of our work. Frankly, we're in a time, especially in U.S. Congress, where they want us to be able to tell exactly what our impact is. They want hard numbers. And we're not able to give them hard numbers very often, although we're working really hard to try to do that, and I'm going to talk about that. But the real impact of Peace Corps is in our hearts and in the hearts of the in my mind, that's the most profound. That's the part that, just crying, when they're sad, I want to, USF has had really a lot of fantastic return volunteers. I do want to mention one who's just about to complete her Peace Corps service. 2005 graduate of USF. After working in human resources for several years, she's passionate about helping young people in her community realize counterparts to seminar for women to try to teach them skills. I hope that the return volunteer community here will welcome you. A background about Peace Corps now. We have more volunteers in the field now than ever before. One thing we've been very successful our programs. So, for example, PEPFAR has been a major contributor, really supporting a lot of our technical training. Department of Agriculture, even organizations like CARE, and partnership yesterday with build the to build our capacity to support our volunteers more effectively. That is really at the heart of what we're doing now, is really trying to improve our support on all levels, both in terms of technical training, but also in terms of safety. What we found is over the last X number of years, Peace Corps has a wonderful brand. Everyone loves Peace Corps, but we haven't kept up with the times in terms of the level. In the last 2 years, since massive reform effort to really strengthen our support to volunteers. Full-time plus, I mean, virtually every office in Peace Corps is reformed at the same time that we've had this fantastic 50th anniversary. So it's been a great time. It's like drinking out of a water hose, but it's all good. I was going to quote at you the three goals. Essence of Peace Corps life. So I don't see time to go to our website and learn more about Peace Corps. I do want to talk about a few things, and that is because we're in USF and because we're in this building dedicated to volunteers, I want to tell you about a really exciting initiative that we're calling Focus, which is an effort to really improve the quality of our technical. So this is a major new initiative started in the 50th anniversary to help our volunteers make a difference in eradicating poverty at the last kilometer, which is where our volunteers work. So we've developed a new strategy focusing on a few highly effective, proven interventions to help our volunteers really tackle the most important community priorities. Our process for identifying these few areas was that we did a very extensive participatory process with our host governments to identify what are your most important priorities. Then we looked at what is it that Peace Corps volunteers can do with no money, but having a lot of goodwill, and it had to be something that we could train someone to do in 3 months and then support through periodic training. So it used to be, until recently, that Peace Corps volunteers were working in 211 different areas, 211 different project areas, and it's impossible to be able to technically support, monitor, and evaluate programs in 211 areas. It's just not possible. So we've basically taken that down to 40 areas that are really proven to, based on evidence, to be the most effective intervention areas for eradicating poverty, and they're the areas that our host countries have told us that they're interested in. So it means that some of our important programs from the past are not going to be continued. For example, we're no longer going to be doing fish farming, which is a big program. I bet there are some people who did fish farming here. It's a great program. But not enough people, not enough countries want fish farmers. And we want to be able to train our volunteers excellently. We want to be able to offer certificate programs if possible, so that, for example, we just developed a massive new ESL, TEFL program, teaching English as a foreign language. Standardized curriculum that offers a certificate from the TESOL Association. So after being a Peace Corps volunteer teaching English, something that's never happened before. A couple of areas I think that are especially important for USF: public health. Of course, health is one of our most important sectors. Major intervention in water and in environment, water and sanitation, very relevant to the Masters International program. So we're working really hard to build technical training packages in partnerships with key partners such as universities, to really build the content of our training programs and to support our volunteers and give them really solid skills for the future. Because the other thing we've learned is that one of the main reasons people don't want to go into Peace Corps is they're concerned about jobs. So that's, I think, what I want to talk about in just a minute. net impact of this new initiative is that we're not only going to be better preparing volunteers to meet the needs of their community, but also we're going to be giving them real life skills that they can use. What you just said, Bob, about as an employer looking at return volunteers is what we find all the time, is that rather than being out of the job market for 2 years, what it really means is that return volunteers come back home with a set of skills that they would never have been able to develop if they had stayed here. Because they are often in a much higher level of engagement in their community. Some of our volunteers work at the national level. Or regional or community. I mean, not everyone has to be doing national stuff, but they often have a level of responsibility that they would not have had elsewhere because there's no one else to do it. And they have to work with communities and figure it out. So they come back equipped with a set of problem-solving skills that really are unique. Not only that, they have a language, they've demonstrated the ability to work culturally, they can work with a team, they understand the importance of communication. And they have a set of skills that are so very important to our country as we move into this next era where, in this incredibly global world where our standing is dropping, and we really need Americans who can work cross-culturally. And Peace Corps volunteers are able to do that. Again, as part of our new strategy, we're working out very, very aggressively to all sorts of partners to help create partnerships that will employ Peace Corps volunteers in really meaningful positions. Government, we're doing this with private sector, we're doing it with foundations. And so I think that there's a huge benefit to our country of creating a whole cohort of people who are culturally competent and internationally very comfortable. That's what all of you bring. And that's what I hope you'll think about, the group of students here, is just to think about the advantages that you can get from Peace Corps. I want to say that there are lots of options out there, and it may be that Peace Corps isn't right for you. But I would urge you to do something that brings you into contact with the rest of the world. Our future as a nation, I believe, really depends on our ability to engage more effectively. So our strategy, the strategy that we have developed and are very, very aggressively pursuing, really is all about upping the ante on our engagement with the rest of the world in a way that plays to Peace Corps' strength, which is grassroots development, relating with people on a person-to-person level, understanding the reality of working in the global village, parliaments of the world, presidents and ministers and what have you. Understanding the reality of the ground is really so I just wanted to quickly, you talked about how your experience was so transformative. Incredible panel that we're going to hear from in just a few moments. I wanted to share a little bit about my own personal story. Every Peace Corps volunteer wants to share their story. And so I have the microphone. I want to share my story too. So one thing about me that actually wasn't in my bio was that my family is the first 4-generation Peace Corps family. So we like to say we were hardwired for Peace Corps. My Aunt Ginny was a Peace Corps volunteer in Turkey from 1964 to 64. My grandparents served as volunteers in and my husband and I served as volunteers from 81 to 83. My cousin also served as a volunteer from 78 to 80 in Thailand. And my nephew just completed his service. Anyway, so I actually, when I was growing up, I knew I was going to go into Peace Corps. I don't honestly think that I would have gotten away with not going into Peace Corps. So we went to Samoa. And like everybody else, I had to pull out the map. I was at first looking at the Horn of Africa. I think I was getting it mixed up with we taught at an all-girls school, an all-girls Catholic school. And I taught English, history, geography, social studies, music. They had me slated to teach religion, but then they found for my schedule. And my husband taught math and science, and he ended up teaching religion because he was Catholic. So between the two of us, we more or less taught every class in school. And we were very pleased to teach. And the evidence is just bearing this out. A lot of evidence from India that mothers who have a 6th grade education, the likelihood of child mortality is half of that of. So educating girls is really one of the most important initiatives we can have. Peace Corps is very proud of our work in education. Education is our biggest program. 45% of our volunteers. Anyway, so I was a teacher and taught high school, and it was a wonderful experience. But my life-changing event actually was not related to being in the school. It was related to my host family was Losa and Vianney. Losa's Vianney was her husband. And about 6 months after I arrived in Samoa, she came to my house and she was sobbing, just absolutely sobbing, like she could hardly speak. She was sobbing so bad. And I thought one of her kids had died, something terrible had happened. It turns out the reason for her anguish was that she was pregnant. I knew she had wanted to try family planning because she had asked me so many questions about family planning. But her husband had not been willing to try it, and it wasn't particularly. So she was pregnant with her 9th child, and she did not know how she was going to get through the day. She got up at 4:30 every morning to cook, to make the fire, to cook porridge for the family, then to iron every single one of those little gold uniforms with the iron that had coals in it. That was while everyone else was still sleeping. Get everyone up, feed them, off to school. Garden, she would have to harvest taro. Taro is a root crop. It's not just like digging around the dirt. Market and she'd sell it, and then she'd get home and she'd wash the clothes by hand. Her day started at 4:30 and it didn't end long after the sun went down. She had never, ever received any prenatal care. Her 8 children were delivered on the floor of her fale. Fale is a traditional house, thatched roof with lines that you can put down. She delivered every single one of her 8 babies on the floor of that fale, attended by her sister. Never had prenatal care. She had never had iron folate ever. She had taken her kids to the health center for immunizations, and I didn't know a thing about pregnancy, but I knew that she needed prenatal care. And so there's a friend, another Peace Corps volunteer, who is a nutritionist at the hospital. So I went to visit this friend, and she said, "You got to get this woman to the health center because she's really a high." So we did. We went to the health center, and she had her first ever prenatal visit. And again, the midwife said, "You have to deliver your baby in this hospital or in this health center because you are really high risk." The youngest child was only a year and a half, about 18, 19 months old. So we begged, controlled, pleaded, threatened her husband for 4 months. And finally, he allowed Losa to have the baby at the house. I went through every single day of that pregnancy with Losa. At the end, she went to the hospital. She went into labor. I was with her, and she delivered a beautiful baby. About an hour later, she went into postpartum. Absolutely died if she had not been. It really drove home to me the importance of access to basic primary health care. And so from that time on, that's been my life's calling. And so my life took a 180-degree turn. I thought I was going to be a teacher, and I ended up being a public health professional. And, you know, I loved education too, but I'm passionate about public health, especially. And it's a topic that has given me great joy. And I've had, like Bob, I've had an international career. My entire career has been international. It's been a real privilege. But Peace Corps changed my life. It transformed my lives in ways, you know, that, like you said, I could never have imagined. And you're going to hear stories from all of you who have similar transformational stories, I'm sure. So I'm going to stop now. The only thing I want to now, just for one moment, speak to the students. You know, what I'd like to say to you is you have an incredible life ahead of you. This world is such a beautiful place, and the opportunities for travel and for study and for research are so much greater than any of us, any of these old researchers had available to us. So you have so many options to explore this world. And there is also so much need out there. And for me, the greatest satisfaction, the most wonderful parts of my life have been places where I've been able to serve others. So I just really encourage you to look for opportunities to use your talent to make a difference in this world. Whatever it is, it could be here in Tampa, it could be in the Philippines, it could be in Uganda, or it could be in whatever. Whatever you do it with an attitude of service, and look for opportunities to help, because I promise you, you'll get joy out of serving others that you never get in. Doesn't mean you can't make the big bucks, because there are plenty of ways of having an incredible, you know, private, very, very successful private sector career. But if you do that, look for opportunities to give back to, because I think the major lesson that I've learned from Peace Corps is that you get more than you give. So thank you very much, everyone.
I think you can see what a difference you have made in this audience. Thank you so much for a wonderfully informative, but more importantly, a very personal message to everyone. And I think what you said was just marvelous. Thank you so much. So on behalf of the University of South Florida, we would like to present the Peace Corps Association through you with a USF bull. So we hope you'll think of us. Thank you.
Oh,
good. Well, it was in the script, too, that you were getting a silver bowl, and I said, no, it's a silver bowl from USF. So, good. Well, we're really honored to have you here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Now we are going to try and turn our attention to an actual Peace Corps volunteer who is serving in South Africa. Sammy Spadowski has agreed to speak with us via Skype, and so we're going to give it a shot, and we're going to call her. So just bear with us 1 second. We'll see if we can't get her. Sammy, are you there?
I am here.
Hey! There's an audience looking at you right now.
Oh, that's sweet. Hello, Bella, Tampa.
So, Sammy, where are you right now?
I am actually in one of the biggest cities of South Africa. I happen to be passing through the city because I am one of the trainers for the next Peace Corps training group. So I'm in a city now, which is very rare. But yeah, so I'm in South Africa.
That's awesome. And where do you usually live?
I live in the province of Limpopo, which is northern South Africa. It's a very, it's kind of desert. It's pretty dry and hot. Rural, very rural, yeah.
And
Well, my main project, my primary project, my program is called CHOP. It's Community HIV Outreach Program. I work with a very small NGO, non-government organization, like a nonprofit org. And we have a drop-in center, which has orphans and vulnerable children, mostly due to HIV/AIDS. South Africa is one of the most affected by HIV and AIDS, and also home-based care, where we have community health workers who go out to 3 different villages. We're working to try to get it to 5 right now. And mostly the patients either have tuberculosis, HIV, and then there's a lot of chronic diseases like diabetes and things like that. So I'm actually working with the org to try to make them more efficient and to try to reach the community better.
Sammy,
Yeah.
just real quick, what's something you miss a lot from the U.S.?
So much. No, actually, honestly, there are materials and things, food that I miss, but the thing I miss the most is people. Yeah, my family, friends. You're pretty isolated out here, but I mean, not completely alone, but I miss people. But if I had to name a material thing, it would probably be fresh vegetables. Well, to grocery shop, to get food, it's about 40 kilometers from my where I live. So I don't grocery shop very much.
Well, thank you so much, Sammy, for Skyping in with us. What time is it there?
It is almost 2 in the morning, so it's
Thank you.
it's actually almost time for me to wake up. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, we'll let you go to bed. Thank you so much for talking with us. All right. And just to let everyone know, I don't think I mentioned it, Sammy is actually a Master's International student at the College of Public Health. So she finished all her core coursework for public health and then left for South Africa this past January. So she'll be coming up on a year shortly. Pretty cool. We can. We'll set up some questions.
I don't think they'll get through customs.
Okay. Okay. All right, well, that worked, so that's good. Oh, wait. Should use this one. Okay, so that was excellent. What a great chance to talk to an in-country Peace Corps volunteer. We now actually have a whole panel of returned Peace Corps volunteers, many who are a part of USF or working with or are USF alums. And so we now have the opportunity to hear a little bit about their stories and ask them a few questions and get their Peace Corps perspective. So if each of you could possibly introduce yourselves and say where you served as a Peace Corps volunteer, dates of service, what your program was, starting with Stephen Church.
Hi everybody, I'm Stephen Church. I guess I should use the microphone maybe. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador in South America from 1996 to 99, and I worked in the agribusiness program.
Well, I actually graduated from USF in 2002, went into Peace Corps in 2003, and served in the Fiji Islands from 2003 to 2005, doing youth and community development.
My name is Ryan Morris. I served in Kazakhstan from 2000 to 2002. My wife and I served together. She's a PhD student here, and I'm a master's student, as well as I work in the College of Public Health. And I did environmental education, and my wife, Amy, did public health work.
And I'm Marcia Taylor. I'm the Director of International Services here at USF. So I work with all the international students and faculty and staff. And I was in Botswana, Africa from 1986 to 1988. So it was 25 years ago this July that I began my service. And I was a junior secondary school teacher, so I went in at what was called a generalist at that time, and I taught math and at one point history and art.
I'm Mike McCarthy. I served in Cameroon from 1999 to 2001 as an environmental and water resources engineer under the Community Health Program. I'm currently a graduate research associate and doctoral student here at USF in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, where I help with the Master's International Program.
Thank you. So I think just a few questions that I'll start with, and we can have each of you go down the line, maybe take a minute or two to talk it over. But one, keeping in the theme of the evening, a question would be how your Peace Corps service impacted your career up until this point.
Okay. I couldn't imagine doing what I'm doing now without having been a Peace Corps volunteer. I neglected to mention I'm director of the Panama Initiative in the College of Public Health and also coordinator of our Peace Corps Masters International Program. So my career up to this point has been international. And when I was graduating from college, I often thought, I wanted to work internationally. I traveled abroad a little bit, but I thought 2 years is such a long time when I was 22, 23 years old. And some of my professors that were much wiser than me told me 2 years is nothing. You know, if you want to work internationally, join the Peace Corps. It's a great way to get your foot in the door. And I fought it, and finally, I don't know what it was that made me change my mind, but I did, and I've been working internationally ever since then, and I have no regrets whatsoever. And I wish I had those, that 6 months that it took me to decide that 2 years wasn't very long to do over again. I would have gotten in much sooner, I think, and I might have stayed a little longer. But so I think just getting in the door is what it's changed my career path, definitely. So, formed my career path, I guess I would say.
I graduated in 2002 from USF with a degree in fine arts and photography. When I was finished, I decided to join the Peace Corps just to see the world, and while there, I worked as a community and youth development officer, and I ended up building and opening an IT school in a rural village. And that was my main project, but I also worked with women and children and with health and abuse and things like that. And so when I came back, I decided to change and become a social worker. And if I had never gone to Peace Corps, I would never have known how much social work meant to me and what I do today.
Well, first of all, I'm suspect that this is a Peace Corps event because we're spot on time every time. I don't.
Do you want to tell them what you used to do? You can tell them our anecdote if you want.
Typically, if in a lot of countries, certainly in Kazakhstan, you might have a meeting at 9 and it starts about 1:30 in the afternoon, maybe, or if it starts anyway. But no, this is made me think of that. But gosh, I don't know. Peace Corps was just, I think I was made for Peace Corps, and it sort of found me when Amy and I finally went. We were both 30, and I had 5 applications. This was during paper application time. I had 5 applications set aside, half completed. I think Amy, she's much more practical than I am. She had maybe 2, but it was the timing. We had always wanted to do it, and we had done lots of good things prior to that, but it just seemed right in our life at that time to go. It's benefited me in a significantly in a number of ways. It helped me realize that I can focus and really gear, crank down on something and be focused and really, really committed. Prior to Peace Corps, I was a fishing guide in Wyoming. I worked in microbreweries, building, I worked on the Hill. I was at Congress. I did all sorts of stuff, but I never really found the right click until I went to Peace Corps and was able to be in an environment that I was really so committed to. So that was what was really good for me. It helped me mature professionally and identify a lot of the skills that I think I always had, but they weren't really. I hadn't found the opportunity to really express and use those tools in a professional environment that gave me satisfaction and gave me the opportunity to commit to something. So I would like to forever be a Peace Corps volunteer and forever be a student, and essentially I will be in some form or fashion in terms of giving back and learning and sharing. So.
And I'd also like to point out that Ryan was my recruiter when I was applying for Peace Corps, and we both went to Kazakhstan, so that was fun.
I always wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer. I can't remember a time when I was younger. I think I saw the advertisements, and I had met an older young man in the neighborhood. My parents had children later in life, so all of their friends had older children who was in the Peace Corps, and he went to Upper Volta, which is now Burkina Faso, and it just sounded so romantic and wonderful. And then the whole aspect of the service was, in addition, I just thought, oh, this is what I have to do. I think my parents were quite indulgent because they said, yeah, okay, sure, you can do that. I don't think they really believed I would ever do it until the day I really got on the plane and actually left. In fact, my mother once sent the embassy to find me because I hadn't written or called her on my schedule, because we had to book calls then, so I hadn't called her on schedule, and someone came to get me to call my mother, which was probably the most embarrassing moment of my life. But that's what they told me, but it is quite embarrassing. But it shaped my entire life and my career, because you are in this service and you feel it in your heart, and you live in this other country, and you realize by the questions you're asked by the individuals that you're really an ambassador for your country. And I truly always felt that I was a mini diplomat, and that I was really a part of a peace effort. I've always been a peace activist, and I really felt that came across in my Peace Corps service, and that I could speak to so many different people. And I wanted to do something like that when I came back. And for me, it was being able to bring internationals to the United States and meet others, because I knew the impact of me going somewhere else and how it had shaped myself, but also meeting other people and letting them meet an American, that what would be a better way to bring peace into the world was to let individuals meet Americans and let Americans meet individuals from so many countries. So every day I use things from my service in my work. And so I'm just so thankful that I did join the Peace Corps.
At the beginning of the event tonight, we saw the 1 minute or 2 minute video, and I think one of the lines in there was, after 2 months I wanted to quit, and after 2 years I didn't want to leave. I put my experience as a community development worker, where I was the first volunteer in my area. After 3 months, I wanted to switch to teaching math and science, and then after 2 years, I knew that that I wanted to be a community or a field development worker for my career. So Peace Corps has had a big impact on the direction I've gone in my career, and in the decade since I've left Peace Corps, a lot of what I've done has built upon that and really tried to get back to the grassroots work that I was doing in the Peace Corps. I've had the opportunities to work on development projects in South Africa, a couple of years in Congo, and a couple more years in Mali. And now in my research at USF, I'm doing research on technologies that are very similar to technologies I was working with in Peace Corps. Lucky to be able to work in Bolivia and Madagascar. And I'm at the point where I have built up experience and a fair amount of knowledge. The bigger impact I think that I can have now and in the future due to Peace Corps is the multiplier factor. I'm probably not going to be spending 12 months out of the year in a village, but I'm able to work with Peace Corps, future Peace Corps volunteers and current Peace Corps volunteers in the Masters International program, and the little bit that I can help them along the way is going to have a multiplying effect through them, through other Peace Corps volunteers that they can work with down the road.
Thank you. Where did you guys live during Peace Corps?
I lived in actually, not a bad, I was in a provincial capital. It was a small city of about 30,000 people. And I had kind of a nice little apartment. Had hot water, electricity. Yeah. I didn't. It's kind of like the Peace Corps lottery. I mean, I guess I won that, and I had people visiting me often because of that, which wasn't a bad thing. So, but yeah, I don't have many hardship stories to tell, but I have no complaints either. So.
Well, I lost the Peace Corps lottery. I lived on the side of a mountain in the middle of Fiji, in what's called a beret, which is probably not far different from where you lived in Samoa. Thatched roof, thatched walls, and no electricity for a while, but I eventually did. My neighbor ran an extension cord from his beret into my beret. After his daughter came with me, she had gangrene in her finger, and she was almost passing out from it. So we cut it open, packed it with iodine, and eventually it healed, and he was so thankful that he gave me the extension cord, which then I could plug in my fan that would just sit in the corner and look at me while I was sweating to death. So, so I was very thankful for that. And yeah, that's where I lived.
Our living situation was somewhat unique and tumultuous. It ended up being really nice. We ended up in a Soviet-style block apartment complex. However, you had great suspicions that it was going to collapse on you at any time because it felt so unsafe. But when we first got there, we lived in an orphanage. I kid you not, and that was we spent our first Christmas in this orphanage with some children, and that was pretty special, like an interesting experience that I'm sure I will never have again, but hopefully I will if I join the Peace Corps again. But it wasn't bad. It just becomes part of it. I almost felt bad living at times in the apartment we had because because we had a steel door. It was a requirement that we have a steel door put on. It was good for safety reasons, and having to pay to have it made helped out a couple of craftsmen to so a little bit of money into the economy. But I quickly realized we wanted to be living at the standard as everyone else. So I was comfortable living where we lived in terms of what we had access to because we weren't really different from many of the other people. So it had that it provides some equilibrium for other things you had to negotiate through in the.
Well, I can never watch the show Survivor. It drives me crazy because I think that's what Peace Corps volunteers do all the time. And certainly during training, we lived in rondavels. I had a square dovel, so mine wasn't round. It was square, so we called it square dovel, and had the thatched roof. And the family had an outhouse. Mine was a very upgraded outhouse because it had an actual seat, a very nice purchased plastic seat that was put on. They were very proud to show me that first thing, that they had a seat on their outhouse, which was quite cute. But my host mother made me learn how to start a fire, so I can start a fire and sweep out the square where we made our food, etc. But then I moved to teacher housing. I lived in 2 locations in Botswana, and my first location was a very rural village outside of the capital, Gaborone, called Otsi, and I still carry that. That's my Yahoo screen name is Otsi Girl because I still think about that time there because it was just beautiful. But teacher housing were these kind of square houses connected together like apartments, but again, we had no electricity and intermittent running water. So I did have to go to the borehole and get water quite often, and I can still carry things on my head which is a very good skill, because there are times when you just need an extra hand. And if you put it on your head, you still have the opportunity to use your hands. But really, having no electricity was perhaps one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to me. Imagine having all the time that you spend on a computer or watch TV. I read every single book I'd never read in the entire, I mean, you name a book, a classic, I have probably read it. I decided to read every single book that I thought Peace Corps volunteers should read. And we had this wonderful library, and I did do that. So living without electricity, there was so much more time that you had to do these other things. But we found lots of uses with batteries. So you got your big, we called them boom boxes in my age. I don't know what they call them now, but we put batteries. So I would run through lots of batteries. I was always telling my parents to send me more money so I could listen to the Voice of America and hear, the news in special English. See, everybody, it was very slow. It's quite fun. But then I did get the a year and a half into my service, I was in a location that was very coveted by a host country national who wanted to take my place as the math teacher. I, of course, got booted and sent to the north of the country to a copper town. And I didn't realize, but the copper town ended up with a different type of student because these parents were not rural parents, and so I was at a more upgraded school. I actually had electricity, but still no hot water. But I had a big bathtub instead of a shower, so the first thing I did was buy all these pots so I could boil my water on the oven that was powered with kerosene. And then I would boil the water and I would pour it into the bathtub and finally take sort of a hot bath and get it in there. So that housing was a little bit better, and I was by myself, which was nice, but it was great to live with the host country national in the teacher housing because we did have a great relationship, and I learned much more about the country that way.
I lived in a small town on the edge of the Sahel Desert in northern Cameroon. If you look at Cameroon on a map, it's shaped like a chicken, so I was living in the head of the chicken. My housing was basic. Technically, it was a mud hut, but it was a fairly nice mud hut. Concrete floors, mud brick walls, and a tin roof. And the best thing about my living situation was right behind my house, a mountain range that went on for about 80 kilometers started.
If I may,
You may.
So anyone who's thinking about or in the process of going, we live. I think it's more policy now that you live with a host family during your service, and any of you are considering or have the option. I strongly encourage you to always live with a host family. I regret not doing that. It was a little more difficult for us as a couple. But I really encourage you to live with a host family because you learn the language so much. You become so much more fluent, so more quickly, and it really improves the dynamic of your.
If I can follow on top of that, and if you don't live with a host family, go for the fourth goal.
Yeah.
Because that's another way. That's another way to really improve your language and your cultural understanding and lots of things. So,
I would just like to say I accomplished the fourth goal.
yeah, there are a couple of
Okay,
us
so did
up there.
Stephen. So yeah, you both married at Coast Country Nationals.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do the fourth goal because I was already married, do the fifth. I brought home a cat. Kazakh kitty. She's well traveled.
Thank you. So many volunteers always have one or two stories that they always go to, anecdotes, funny anecdotes. Can any of you think of any that you'd like to share at this time?
I know one.
Do you know one?
I know one.
Okay.
I know a few. If I can condense this quickly, I was, one of the first times I was on, I'd been in country maybe like a month, and we were learning Russian, and because my wife and I were serving together, we lived in one village, but my environmental program cohort was training in another village, so I had the good fortune of having to travel further for training during the pre-service training, so you do several hours a day. So I was, one of the first few days I was on my own, and my host mother, who was maybe 10 or 12 years my senior, would hold my arm and walk me to the bus stop and like get me on the bus, and it was so amazing. And yet somewhat embarrassing, because I'd had the good fortune, I'd traveled quite a bit and done a lot of stuff prior to Peace Corps and felt, at ease. And so anyway, I was coming back home, and my host mother was not going to be able to meet me at the bus stop. Problem. And the bus driver asked me, because you always had to announce your stop, and he asked where I was going. That's what stop. Well, I overheard, where are you from? Because I still felt like I looked like a foreigner. And I'm like, oh, America. And he looked at me, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but he sort of had like this black bean teeth, like health is just, dental health is really poor there. And he looks at me and he goes, whoa, and he looks in the mirror and he goes, all right, everybody, we're going to America. And the most solemn, they look like the Russians and the Soviets and Kazakhs, they're just so stern, and all of a sudden they just go, woo! As if we had been on the descent on Busch Gardens. It was amazing. I'll never ever forget that. It was one of the first times to make a whole bus full of people smile. It was like, yes. So. Anyway, but I quickly learned to tell the difference and understand how to mumble properly.
Mike, do you have any stories?
I can't top that one.
You can't. So what advice would you guys give to anyone who's thinking about applying for Peace Corps or is going to be heading into Peace Corps shortly? Because we do have 1 or 2 invitees who will be leaving in the next few months.
I would just say, when you go to Peace Corps, you really don't ever know exactly what you're going to do. They give you an assignment, and then they drop you off, and you kind of just wonder what you're going to do for a little bit. But you always find there's always a place for you. There's going to be people who will guide you. There's going to be, you're going to see the needs around the community. You're going to look around when you start your project, and there's going to be people standing there watching you who are going to do nothing more than just want to help you. During your Peace Corps experience, you're going to be a doctor, a CFO, a CEO, an IT specialist. I mean, all things, just basic knowledge that we have here is going to be a huge knowledge base that you're going to share. I mean, Neosporin makes you a god. So, I mean, these are things that you're going to share with them and to help make their life, their families better. And in return, you get a wealth of knowledge that you never knew existed that will make your life better. That's my advice. To do it, just go.
Yeah, I agree. If somebody's kind of hesitant and timing is one of those things, 2 years seems like a long time, just scratch that off your list. I spent way too much time debating that when I was going through the application process. Fortunately, the application process was short for me, so I didn't lose a lot of time. But if it can take up to a year just to apply, go ahead and do it. And if you're worried about being gone for 2 years, by the time you get back, 2 years will have gone like that. And so that's what I try to share with everybody. If that's your one hesitation or your biggest hesitation, forget about it. Especially now, you won't be left behind. You may have trouble relating with your friends a little bit when you get back, but you'll get over that. They'll get over it. And now the way technology is, you're never completely out of the loop. I think that was different for a lot of us, even me, that I wasn't gone that long ago, but the last month or 2 months I was in my site, I paid for dial-up internet to have email. I dialed up and I had to wait 15 minutes for an email to load, and so I probably wasted more time trying to get internet than I would have just going to wait for a phone call or write another letter. But the time flies, and once you do make the decision, I think everybody will agree, just go for it, full on. Don't turn things down. Accept any opportunity that comes your way. Don't go into it thinking you're going to do one specific thing and that's all you want to do. Just go in with an open mind, no expectations, and make the best of it.
I would, if I may, I'd like to add a different, alternative perspective to that. You want to make sure you're doing it for the right reason. that because there's a lot that goes into being a Peace Corps volunteer, there's a lot that goes into bringing you into a country safely and matching you with, in an environment that is safe and it allows you to be successful and be healthy. So make sure, you know, like I said, it took my wife and I a few years to figure it out, and it was a perfect time for us. You know, could there have been a better time? Sure, maybe. But just make sure, you know, Peace Corps, it's been there for 50 years. So if you do need to wait for one reason or another, be honest with your recruiter, be honest with yourself. Because if you go over and you get there and you realize, you know, things just, it doesn't feel right or it's not working for you and you have to leave, there's, you know, it does leave a void in the program. There are wasted resources. There are networks of people who have been counting on that volunteer potentially for years, that there could be someone's reputation on the line. So make sure that when you do go, that you're not only doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for, you're taking in the entire process and understand why you're going. But I can't, you know, I just, it was the best thing that ever happened to me and my wife in terms of best experience we've had so far, aside from kids. But it's equally traumatic.
That's returned.
So.
Yeah, I've spoken to several people who are in the application process, and that always seems to scare people. Do I have the right things to put on the application? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think Ryan is correct. You need to make sure that what your motivation is, you'll see that as you fill out the application, because it certainly talks to you about the motivation. But I have to say, if this is your passion and you know that this is what you want to do and you want to serve, that will come out in the application. And worrying about, do you have the right credits? Did you take the right courses? Did you do an internship? Did you meet the right people? Do you have the right references? I think some of that's irrelevant, because in the interview stages, you'll be able to say, this is what I want to do. And they're all trained to understand that. They hear that. And they know, and they immediately will say, this is the person I need to take with me, and this is who needs to go to the country. And I do have one little piece of practical advice if you are selected, which I'm sure all of you are going to go back and apply and be selected. If you go to a country that you think is going to be warm, remember to pack a coat.
Yes.
Because I did have to write to my parents, and keep in mind, I was there when there was not really much internet, and so I needed to wait for that coat to come. And I did need a coat in Africa. There was a time when I needed it a lot, so I was very fortunate that my mother would send me anything I wanted. So I had her send me a lot of things, but the coat, take a coat. No matter where you go, take a coat. Because when you don't have electricity, it's really cold when it's 50 degrees out. Really cold.
Is there anyone in the audience who's not a student and contemplating Peace Corps? No, you'll be your own ambassadors. If you know, I think guessing this is the core of students that are most interested, possibly. But I talk about Peace Corps all the time to people, and I'm always encouraging people to go. And in my group alone, we had one guy was 74.
True.
You know, the bulk of volunteers seem to be in the early 20s, soon after, right out of college, and that makes the most sense. But we had volunteers of every age, and that is, I think, really a terrific time, and they add a lot of experience and maturity but they add a lot to the program. So if you go into the program you may go into, there might be a really broad, quite a diverse group, and that's something to look forward to. But anyone else who might be considering thinking, oh, I'm too old, or I don't have skills, set aside. It doesn't matter at all.
I just reiterate what the other panelists said about keeping an open mind. You might be hoping to go to Central or South America and get that invitation and it says Africa. And I've had friends where that's been the case. And, kind of when you're thinking in one direction and something else pops up, it's hard to adjust sometimes, but, you might, you'll probably go on to have just as good an experience, or it will open doors that you never thought would be open before. You might go in thinking you're going to be a teacher and come out and decide you want to be a public health specialist. So just, I'd say keep, from the application stage, try to keep an open mind through training, through where you're placed, and really through your whole service.
Really quick, what did what did the training look like for each of your programs?
I was in a small town outside of the capital, Quito, which had hosted training for quite a while, so the community was kind of used to it, used to having the groups of gringos wandering around. It was 3 months. Generally, it was in a training center, a centralized location. I know they've moved away from this quite a bit now, but this was kind of the former way of training. And we went to basically class. We would go to the training center, had 4 hours a day or so of Spanish. Then we had technical training. We actually had, in the same group that I was training when, we had animal resources, agriculture and agribusiness, and natural resources. And so it was like a little farm, basically. We had gardens, we had animals, we had everything that we could do, as many hands-on activities and work in our Spanish right there, and then they would kind of turn us out and we'd have to do stuff with the community also. And then we had a technical training trip where we'd go out to different parts of the country to see the different parts of Ecuador and how things are done away from that idyllic training center where everything was done by the book and everything worked out perfectly and, you know, not real life. But so that was what our training was like. And we lived with host families in the.
When I went to Fiji, we were the first group back, I think since the early 90s maybe. So when we got there, we lived inside villages with host families where we learned how to live in the country, cook on fire, wash clothes with stick soap and brush, so that you would be prepared when you went to your site on how to live without washing machine and a stove. And you learned the language. We learned the language. We learned how to eat, dig up taro, and other things like that. We did go to somewhat of an informal class with a man who was there to teach us the language, and so that's what we spent most of our days doing, was learning the language, and at night just spending times with the family, learning how they live, learning their culture, and that's pretty much our training. I think it's 12 weeks long, and after that, into your program.
For the training that anyone will go through pre-service training is you're not a volunteer yet. You might be in country, but you're not a volunteer. And I think that's a pretty clear distinction, because you're just like the application process. You're being vetted. Because you have a really important role in that country. Not only to take care of yourself, but to represent the U.S. properly. So Peace Corps takes training and safeties. That's the top priority. And so once you go through training many hours a day, you're in class learning about being culturally sensitive and learning how to interact in that culture. But then you're also taking language classes. But once you get through the pre-service training, you're really still training every day. You're given, I think it's still true, you're given the opportunity to hire or identify pay someone for language services. I had a tutor, next door neighbor. She was a widow, and man, I would sit with her for 2-3 hours every other day and drink vodka and just open up about just everything. It was great. It was because it couldn't do that. It was a safe environment, and so it was great. But so you're in training every day all the way through until you leave. And so it's just whatever Peace Corps gives you the tools and the opportunity to capitalize on them. You just have to be dedicated to do so. If you want to if you want to hibernate and be on Facebook or whatever, you can. You certainly can. But if you want to be an outgoing volunteer and learn and be really where the real training comes, you get the the foundation during pre-service training, and then you become rewarded with being a volunteer, and then it's up to that time to hone those skills that you've given.
And my training was much like everyone else is saying, living with a host family and 12 weeks of language training and cultural sensitivity training, and then training specific to what we were doing. But I do have to say that I'm a trainer now in a professional organization, and some of the best training I've ever had was with the Peace Corps. I think it was very well put together, taught you to understand the country you were in, was very sensitive to different learning styles and different needs. That was my experience. And so I draw on that whenever I do training. I often think back to exercises that we did, and it really helped me to be a teacher. I hadn't been a teacher before, and we had site visits and things, and I was very appreciative of that, of the fact that I wasn't being sent to the middle of nowhere to not know what I was doing. I felt when I was done with my training, I was ready. I could go out there. Of course, when you get in front of the classroom, you're a little nervous, and your students are sometimes older than you. But I felt I had all those tools there, and that Peace Corps was very careful about that.
I was in a community-based training about an hour outside of the Capitol, and when Katie asked earlier if I had any anecdotes, I think most of my anecdotes related to my homestay father, who was quite a character. Just to give you a brief idea of what he was like, in the living room, they had nice furniture, and then in the center, like where a mantle would be, there was a huge poster, and it was Sylvester Stallone in Rambo. To go along with that, we'd have the first day we had language training. There are 5 volunteers in my village for training, and we had the language training next door to the house I was staying at. We started at 9 a.m., like the 5 of us are there with our language trainer, the easel, and flip charts, sitting in our chairs, and 9 a.m., my homestay dad pulls up, sits down on the porch, pulls out a beer, cracks it open with his teeth, and well, he hung out for a while until the language trainer asked him to leave. But he was that's just a point to make. He was a funny guy. He was a great guy, and I have many stories from my homestay family that I'll share with you afterwards if you'd like to hear.
Okay, and then I think this will be the last question, but what is the thing you miss most about your Peace Corps country?
I think Marcia said this, someone said this about having the time. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, like I said, I didn't have internet. I did have electricity, so although I often read by a candle because I had electricity, but I didn't have very many lamps or lights in my apartment. But having the time to read as much as I read, to sit down and talk to people as much as we'd sit and talk. I talk probably more about politics when I'm in Ecuador than I do here in the States, and I know less about Ecuadorian. I mean, I probably know more about Ecuadorian politics because of how much I talk with people when I'm there. And so I think just, for me, the time. And I see people nodding their heads, but it's hard to ever recapture that. So.
I agree. The time, I think the community is what I miss the most. Here you're always, I gotta get to work, then I gotta pick up the kids, and I gotta get dinner made. There's never a rush. Never. Nobody's in a hurry to do anything, ever. I mean, like you said, I have time, 9 o'clock meeting starts at 1, but you've sat around and you've listened to the women tell stories, or you listen to the men discuss, village politics or what needs to happen. Everybody has some sort of say in what goes on in their community. And it's just a very, very happy, slow pace. Nobody has to do this right now. It can always wait. What's important is talking with your families, talking with your friends, having tea with 18 different people on your way to school. It's just the community is what I miss the most.
There's so many things, but it is the time and the ability to live at a pace that's, at least where we were, it was sustainable, you weren't exhausted, you had the ability to share with others and communicate, get your work done, not be overwhelmed. But there was this interesting little ping that stayed inside you, which I'm not going to generalize about American culture, but we're so fast-paced and we're always obsessed with time, but we take it for granted. And there, once you hit that sweet spot in your training and in your experience where you're like, oh my God, I only have a year left. You feel hungry to get the work done because, so you had that constant ping of, being, I don't have that as a student. Probably why I'm still in school, but I did as a volunteer, where it's like you just really want to be out doing stuff, meeting people, taking in every aspect of the culture, and that's kind of what I miss. You hear and you feel overwhelmed, you feel exhausted, you feel anxious, but in Peace Corps really it lets you settle down, and your cadence as a human is more, I don't know, appreciate it more.
I miss two things I often talk about. I really miss hitchhiking. Mm-hmm. And if you've been a volunteer, you know exactly what I mean. I was talking to a few gentlemen at the beginning. It was so much fun. And there were so many wonderful people, but just sticking your hand out. And sometimes I just stick my hand out and think, I want us to stop by the side of the road. And then I remember people get killed here when that happens, so you can't do it here. But it was just a joy. I loved hitchhiking. I met so many interesting, fun people. But the other thing I miss was the food. Nobody's mentioned that, but you do get some unique food that you won't eat anywhere else. And there was this meat dish that I've never been able to replicate because they made it in these big iron pots, and you had to beat the meat with salt and other ingredients that the women told me I wouldn't understand. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Botswana was a beef production country because it's a cattle culture complex, and so it's we had a lot of beef. We ate a lot. We ate every part of the beef.
Yeah.
But so this wonderful meat dish that they would make only for weddings or funerals, so bigger events, and they would beat it and beat it. It took days and it was just the most amazing thing. And sometimes I just think about it. So maybe someday I'll get to go and there'll be a wedding.
I think a lot of vegetarians, I've seen vegetarians force-fed chicken because it's not meat. Kazakhstan.
No, you couldn't. It was hard to be a vegetarian in my country.
Possible, but
it was possible.
Chicken isn't meat for some reason.
Yeah, there no fresh vegetables. I laughed because I thought, well, nothing's changed. I was there 25 years ago.
The thing I miss the most about the town I lived in is the night market. The town was called Mora, and there was a great night market there that went on till usually about 10 or 10:30 at night. People would be selling bread. There'd be restaurant shacks that would make omelets. There'd be the motorcycle taxis would hang out there, and that's where the people that ended up being my close group of friends, they all worked there, doing one thing or another, selling eggs or driving a motorcycle taxi. And the group of people that ended up being my close friends, it was probably about 6 months after I had met them that I realized this. They all had names like Saddam and Castro and whatnot. And it was about 6 months after I got to know them that I was looking at my friends. I was sitting down and looking at my friend selling some bread, Saddam, and I'm like, he really does look like Saddam Hussein. So I asked another friend, and they all had nicknames. Castro, I can't remember, he was after Castro, I can't remember how they came up with that, but yeah, Saddam was because he looked like Saddam Hussein. And so that was one thing that it took me a while to figure out, but what I really miss will just be hanging out at the market with my friends.
I changed mine. Well, it falls into time because we lived about 29 hours away from Peace Corps headquarters in a small town called Atbasar. It was the middle of the steppe, and the wind would blow from unencumbered for hundreds of miles. But we used to ride the train, and that being on the train is just amazing. Worth flying over there just to ride the train, and you're just jammed on, the train stops, you get off, you shop and get back on, drink, smoke, whatever. It's so intense, and it's so much fun. I miss it.
Actually, I wanted to add a couple too that I could probably go on. This is one of them, kind of just being able to go off of each other and having this camaraderie, just instantaneous, even though we were all in different countries and different parts of the world. That just, when you walk into a get-together of volunteers, you know, some weekend, 5 of you get together, the beers or the vodka or whatever happened to appear out of nowhere for some strange reason, and people just kind of just hang out and talk and
About digestive systems.
Yeah, and you can talk about anything, including anything at all. You can be eating dinner and talking about what's going to happen in 2 hours, and everybody knows where you are, and they don't care. And it's kind of hard. You don't always have, except for these sorts of events or similar events, you don't always have that instant. You know, we're all on the same wavelength. We're all together. We're all going through the same but different experience. And on a more practical side, I miss public transportation.
Yes.
Just being able to not worry about having to drive and just get on a bus, hop into a taxi, take a, whatever, and be able to get anywhere I want to in an entire country, let alone within just a city.
Bring your animals along, your chickens and your goats.
The seat comes back and my knees no longer can handle anymore, but I can get there cheap, I can get there easily, and we don't have that good of a system here. Other thing about this, sorry.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing all of your stories. I hope everyone has appreciated hearing them. We can give them a round of applause, please. Our esteemed speakers, thank you so much for coming and speaking and telling us all about your stories. We all really appreciate it. Thank you. One more round of applause. USF World for putting on this event and supporting the Peace Corps office here at University of South Florida. They've done an incredible job of putting this event together and supporting it. So thank you so much to the USF World staff. I'm sure that if anyone has any questions for Return Peace Corps volunteers, we have so many in the audience. I know you all stood up earlier, and so if anyone would like to ask you any questions, I'm sure you'd love to share some stories. So please feel free to do so. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.